Oh, whoops, I'll figure it out. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Hello. Thank you. My name is Lizel Ramos. I work with the Agency for Persons with Disabilities State Office. I'm a program administrator there, in charge of managing the waiting list and waiver enrollment. So, I think almost everyone got a PowerPoint presentation. If you didn't, I have a few more in here. Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Okay, so I need to do this. I need to hold this, but at the same time, I need to have my presentation in my hand, and I need to click the slide. So I'll try to do all that at the same time without dropping everything. So today, we're going to be talking about the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, Eligibility Application, and Eligibility Requirements. I'm very happy that you're all here. I really hope that I'm able to answer any questions you may have. And questions that I'm not able to answer, of course, I'll take home with me and I'll find answers for you. These are the topics that we're going to discuss. The application eligibility determination process. I'm going to talk about the time frames and the requirements and how to submit an application and when you should submit an application. We're going to talk about something that I'm pretty sure you've already heard about, and others have talked about it in other sessions. So I'm going to explain to you our waiting list and our waiting list priority categories. And everything you see under bullet number 3, those are the ways in which someone is able to get a waiver spot. And so we're going to discuss each of them, and I'm going to briefly tell you about our iBudget waiver services. So our APD application is available online, and you can get to it by going on our website at apdcares.org. You go to the Customers tab, and you scroll down to where it says Applications, and there you're going to find our application. It's going to be, you will need to print it, and you will need to fill it out by hand. We are working on making it available online, so to where you'll be able to fill it out online and submit it online through our iConnect system, but we're not quite there yet. In the meantime, we ask that you please print it, fill it out, and send it in to your regional office. It will be available in English, or it is available in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And it is divided in several sections. I think we've had some questions about what those sections are, but you'll notice how some of them you will need to fill it out, and some of them our regional office fills out for you. You know what? I'm going to move here, if it's okay with you. There, that way I don't have to juggle so many things in my hands. I hope that's okay. So in order to accept an application, we accept them from a parent or a court-appointed guardian for a minor child, a legally competent adult, an authorized legal representative, and an authorized legal representative would be somebody that you've authorized in writing to do so. For applicants under the age of 18, the person's legal representative must sign the application for them. Applications are submitted to the APD regional office that serves the area where you reside at. And these applications are good for services from the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, as well as if you wish to apply to go into an intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Fax submissions will need to be returned, so please make sure that you either mail the application or you hand it in. You bring it over to the APD regional office. And you can find our addresses, and you can find telephone numbers on our website, and it'll also tell you, where you can mail the application. But if you have any questions, you can always call and find out where to send the application to. So in order to apply for services, applicants who are 18 years of age or older can sign or must sign their own application unless they've been declared incapacitated by the court. In that case, then someone else can sign it for them, someone that has already been determined, either their legal guardian or legal representative, or who has the right to sign documents for them. If there's an adult who's unable to sign it, but they're capable, meaning that they haven't not been determined incapacitated, they can mark the signature line, and someone else can validate and witness and just say this is their signature. So once the agency receives a completed, signed, and dated application for services, we will review the application and all supporting documentation to make a determination as to whether or not additional documentation is necessary. And in those cases, we would notify the applicant or their legal representative in writing of what are the types of documents that will be necessary to receive. Okay, this is where we start getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty and more detailed type of information. As part of the application process, APD will request proof of a developmental disability diagnosed prior to the age of 18. So documentation of a developmental disability may include the list that you see in front of you. So standardized IQ tests. There are many different types of IQ tests. Some of them are the Stanford Binet, the Wechsler, and there's many really. There's a test of nonverbal intelligence. So whatever test you have available that has been used to document an intellectual disability, that's what we would need. We would also need tests of adaptive functioning, and examples of those include the Vineland, the AAMR, Adaptive Behavior Scales. There's one that's called the ABAS, and that stands for Adaptive Behavior Assessment System, or the ABES, the Adaptive Behavior Evaluation Scale, and there are others also. In addition to that, we would need diagnostic evaluations from licensed professionals, depending on the diagnosis, of course, documentation from a medical doctor or healthcare professional, genetic testing, school records, or psychological evaluations. So, as part of the process, we will also need proof of identity, and that's required in order to make sure that the applicant is who they say they are. And so these are some of the examples of documents that we will need to show proof of identity. These are the birth certificate, resident alien card, a person's state's driver's license or state issue ID card, a military dependent's ID card, the applicant's original social security card, or you can also submit a US passport, certificate of naturalization, certificate of citizenship, school photo for applicants who are 16 years of age or younger. Application and the eligibility determination process includes the review of all available documentation by our regional APD staff, and we have 45 days from the date the application was received to issue a determination of eligibility or ineligibility, or 60 days for applicants aged 6 years of age or older, or 90 days when we need additional information. So if you keep track of when you submitted an application, when it was received at the regional office, you can, pretty much tell when you should start hearing back from the regional office. And if you haven't heard from them, that's a good cue for you to call and find out, what may be going on. These are some requirements in order to be eligible for agency services. Even before we start looking at whether or not you have a confirmed diagnosis of a developmental disability, we have to find out if the applicant is at least 3 years of age. And the reason for that is because children from birth to 3 are served by a different agency. They're served by the Department of Health, by the Early Steps program. By the time they turn 3, then that's when APD can or may begin providing some services. The person must be a resident of and domiciled in the state of Florida, and must have a confirmed diagnosis of a developmental disability prior to the age of 18. So it's also important to mention that only applicants whose domicile is in Florida are eligible for services. Applications for clients who reside in another state but whose parents have moved to Florida, we may begin to review the documentation, but it's not until the applicant is physically located in the state of Florida that we can complete the application process and issue a determination. And please feel free to ask any questions you may have throughout the presentation. In order to determine if the person has a developmental disability, we, for eligibility purposes for the agency, we will be looking at whether or not the person has an intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 70 or below, cerebral palsy, a severe form of autism, spina bifida cystica, or, and I've never been able to say that word, but something like myelomeningocele. Spina bifida occulta is not one of the diagnoses that we serve. People with Down syndrome, Phelan-McDermid syndrome, or Prader-Willi syndrome. And we must have documentation that the disability manifested itself prior to the age of 18. And can be reasonably expected to last forever. Yes.
Yes, hi. I have a question. My son was diagnosed when he was 17. High functional autism, but still autism, and then we got denied services because we were unable to show that he had autism before. Obviously, this is not something that it just came out. How do you prove, God bless you, how do you prove that he can qualify?
And that's a great question. And we get that question all the time. So I'm gonna talk a little bit specifically about autism, because that is one that comes up a lot. And we're gonna talk about the specific requirements to prove autism prior to the age of 18. Yes.
I'm sorry, my question's about autism as well, like severe forms, like what does that mean specifically?
We're gonna talk about that. I knew you were gonna ask. I have it in here. Yes, is it about autism? Okay.
Hi, my question is about, my daughter she's on the list, and she's been on there since 2 years old, but they say the only way she comes off the list is if me and my husband dies, or she becomes combative. Okay.
No. We'll talk about that too. We're gonna talk about how you get off the waiting list. All right, so, okay, what we may be talking about your questions as we go. Huh? Okay.
Are there any other syndromes that you're considering adding, like specifically fetal alcohol syndrome?
I'm not, nobody from the agency can add syndromes. The way that happens is you would have to go to the legislature, and the legislature makes those determinations. So these specific disabilities were added at one point or another through the Florida legislature, and the last one that was added a few years ago was Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So advocates go to the legislature, they talk to their representatives, and that's how they get added.
Yeah, my daughter finally got a diagnosis last year. It's a very rare condition, CDKL5. It's a genetic deficiency. Now it's not in the list, so.
Sometimes your son or daughter may have another diagnosis, but if that diagnosis includes a diagnosis of an intellectual disability with an IQ of 70 or below, then they would be eligible as long as they have the diagnosis of intellectual disability, which happens a lot. People get a primary disability of something else that's not on the list, but if that affects their intellectual disability, then they would, as indicated prior to the age of 18, then they would be eligible. So let me just see if I can continue, and I'll be happy to take any more questions and any specific questions about your own personal situation. I'll be happy to take like right after the presentation, if that's okay with you. But they're all good questions, thank you. Okay, so establishing eligibility for intellectual disability. So individuals with intellectual disabilities have significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior, which manifests before the age of 18 and can reasonably be expected to continue indefinitely. This is evidenced by IQ scores of 70 or below, along with severe deficits in adaptive functioning as measured on standardized tests. Intellectual disabilities are determined by licensed psychologists. So it may be that in the situation of your daughter, that if she has another disability or another diagnosis, she may be eligible for services, maybe under intellectual disability. So if she also has a diagnosis of an intellectual disability, then she would be eligible. So cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy means a group of disabling symptoms of extended duration, which results from damage to the developing brain that may occur before, during, or after birth, and that results in the loss of impairment of control over voluntary muscles. For the purposes of this definition, cerebral palsy does not include those symptoms or impairments resulting solely from a stroke. Diagnosis is confirmed by written documentation from either a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, or other medical records documenting a diagnosis of cerebral palsy prior to the age of 18. All right. Autism means a pervasive, neurologically based developmental disability of extended duration, which causes severe learning communication or behavior disorders with age of onset during infancy or childhood. Individuals with autism exhibit impairment in reciprocal social interaction, impairment in verbal and nonverbal communication, and imaginative ability, and a markedly restricted repertoire of activities and interests. A diagnosis of autism may be made by a licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, neurologist, or developmental pediatricians who have specific training and experience in making such diagnosis. For purposes of eligibility for APD, and this is what happens a lot. A child may have a diagnosis of autism, but they have to meet the eligibility criteria for APD services for severe autism in order to be eligible to receive services from the agency. So there is a long list of criteria that must be met. I'm going to mention a few of them because if I start mentioning all of it, we'll be here for a long time. But if you want specific information, I can tell you exactly where to go to find it. It is on the website and it is available for anyone to see. But for purposes of eligibility for APD pursuant to our rule, autism means a condition which meets the requirements in law in Chapter 393, which is pervasive, meaning always present and without interruption, neurologically based, meaning that the condition is not the result of physical impairment, a developmental disability with age of onset during infancy or childhood, with extended duration, meaning that the condition reasonably can be expected to continue indefinitely into the future, causes severe learning disorders resulting in both severe communication disorders affecting both verbal and nonverbal skills and severe behavior disorders. Autism is characterized by an individual who evidences some of the following features: severe communication disorders, and this may include a delay in or total lack of the development of spoken language, stereotyped or repetitive use of language or idiosyncratic language. For those applicants with speech, marked impairment in the use of multiple nonverbal behaviors, such as eye-to-eye gaze, facial expressions, body posture, and gestures, failure to develop peer relationships, or a lack of spontaneous seeking to share enjoyment. And the list goes on. There's more. But also, the other thing that we would be looking at is severe behavior disorders, which are restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped patterns of behavior, interests, and activities, which may include apparently inflexible adherence to specific non-functional routines or rituals, stereotyped and repetitive motor mannerisms, and persistent preoccupation with parts of objects. And like I mentioned before, I'll be happy to provide you with more detailed information and where you can go to find out more information about it. And if you have any specific questions about, having been denied or something of that nature, I'll be happy to discuss it with you after the presentation, if that's okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah, what's the question? I'm sorry. You can submit, yeah, you can submit anything you have. However, we need documentation from a professional that has documented all of that. Mm-hmm. You can, and we have received things of that nature. Yeah, pictures, and we have. All right, so for spina bifida, individuals with spina bifida have a medical diagnosis of spina bifida cystica or myelomeningocele. A diagnosis is confirmed by written documentation from either a medical doctor, doctor of osteopathy, or medical records that document a diagnosis of spina bifida prior to the age of 18. Individuals with spina bifida occulta are not eligible to receive services from APD. Down syndrome means a disorder caused by presence of an extra chromosome 21. Evidence under this category requires medical records documenting a chromosome analysis, also known to as a karyotype, finding the individual has an extra genetic material in their number 21 chromosome. In absence of a chromosome analysis, a diagnosis can be accepted from a healthcare provider certifying the physical signs of syndrome. A prenatal diagnosis or a prenatal diagnostic test may also be accepted as proof for eligibility purposes. For Phelan-McDermid, this is a syndrome that is very rare. Children are born with a specific chromosomal abnormality. Although the range and severity of symptoms may vary, Phelan-McDermid syndrome is generally characterized by low muscle tone, absent to severely delayed speech, moderate to profound intellectual disability, minor malformed or misshapen features, and symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. Establishing eligibility for Phelan-McDermid syndrome requires documentation from a physician which provides the diagnosis of Phelan-McDermid syndrome as derived from genetic testing. Prader-Willi syndrome means an inherited condition typified by neonatal hypotonia with failure to thrive, hyperphagia, or excessive drive to eat, which leads to obesity, usually by the age of 18 to 36 months of age. Mild to moderate intellectual disability, hypogonadism, short stature, mild facial dysformism, and a characteristic neurobehavior. Diagnosis is confirmed by written documentation from either a medical doctor, doctor of osteopathy, or medical records that document a diagnosis of Prader-Willi prior to the age of 18. Individuals considered high risk. These are children ages 3 to 5 who are at a high risk of developing a developmental disability. And they may have a delay in cognition, language, or physical development. A child surviving a catastrophic infectious disease or a traumatic illness known to be associated with developmental delay. With a parent or guardian with a developmental disability who may require assistance in meeting the child's developmental delay. Okay, so this is where we get to the waiting list priority categories. You may have heard that we have 7 priority categories, and you probably heard earlier that individuals in categories 1 through 5 are going to be served this year with the extra money we received from the legislature. So let's go through what these categories mean and why some are being highlighted to receive a spot on the waiver. So applicants who are determined to be eligible for APD services and also eligible for the iBudget waiver, the eligibility criteria is slightly different, so they have to be eligible for both. They will be placed on the agency's waiting list for waiver services in one of 7 priority categories. And the reason we have to place individuals on a waiting list is because we have close to 55,000 people who are currently clients of the agency. Of those, around 35,000 receive services through the waiver, and that we have enough budget right now to provide services to 35,000 people. That leaves 22 to 23 people, 23,000 people that we're not able to provide services to, and they have to be placed on a waiting list. Priority category 1 is specific for clients who meet the crisis criteria. crisis criteria is very specific. Is people who are homeless, and that literally means homeless on the street, or whose situation is very dangerous and they may not be able to stay in their current living setting within the last weeks or so. Individuals who exhibit behaviors that are a danger to themselves or others. We have very severe cases of behaviors where we've heard all kinds of stories where the individual may have autism and may have severe behaviors and pushed grandmother down the stairs. I mean, we're talking about severe behaviors and they pose a danger to themselves or those who are with them in the home. Or individuals whose caregivers are in extreme duress and no longer able to provide care for them. We have a lot of situations where either the parents are getting older or the parents are diagnosed with terminal illness, or things happen where the caregiver, the individual needs a caregiver, but the caregiver is no longer able to provide care. So in those cases, they would meet the priority category number 1, which is for crisis. Once they meet that category, the interesting thing is, it is a priority category on the waiting list. But if you meet that criteria right there, you go straight to the waiver. So it's not like you get placed in priority category 1, because once you are found to be in that situation, that means you need waiver services immediately to alleviate the crisis situation. So those individuals go straight to the waiver. Category 2 are children in the foster care system who are either transitioning out of the foster care system either by adoption, reunification, or permanently placed with a relative, or sometimes there are some children between the ages of 18 and 22 who need waiver services, have opted out of foster care, and will need services. Individuals who meet this criteria also go straight to the waiver. So say, for instance, a child is in foster care and also meets the eligibility criteria for APD services. That child, once they have been adopted or once they've been reunified with their parents or placed permanently, they go straight to the waiver. So individuals in categories 3, 4, and 5, they literally go on the waiting list. So we have a list that identifies them as being in categories 3, 4, and 5, and there's a reason why. And they have presented documentation that proves that they need to be in one of these 3 categories. So for category 3, it would be individuals whose caregiver, and you may say, well, this sounds very similar to crisis. Well, it is. It's very similar to crisis, but they haven't raised to the crisis criteria yet. So these are individuals whose caregiver has a documented condition. They're expected to render the caregiver unable to provide care within the next 12 months, and for whom a caregiver is required, but no one else is available to provide that care, or who are at substantial risk of incarceration within, they have risky behavior and they're at risk of incarceration, or whose behaviors or physical needs place them or their caregiver at risk. So this is considered to be somebody who, at the moment that their application is received, meet this criteria, but don't quite rise to the crisis level. They're placed on category 3, which means they have significant needs. That we know, but we don't have sufficient funds at the moment to provide services to them, although I'm going to talk in a little while about we do. Individuals in categories 4 and 5 are those who, well, 4 is individuals whose caregivers are 70 years of age or older. So a lot of individuals who have been taken care of by their parents, and their parents are reaching an age where it's starting to get difficult to provide or continue to provide the care, they will go into category 4. Category 5 are those who are expected to graduate within the next 12 months from high school, and need support to obtain a meaningful day activity, maintain competitive employment, or pursue an accredited program of post-secondary education. So typically, this would be individuals who are between the ages of 22, 23, 24, maybe 25. If by the age of 25, they're still in category 5, we need to figure out if you still meet that criteria. Are you still going to graduate? Well, we know that as to the school system, you know, you exit the school system by the age of 22. So this is one that if you know, or if you are in a category 5 and you need to continue to stay in category 5, you need to let us know. Otherwise, you will be placed in category 6 after a while. Categories 6 and 7 are the remaining categories. So anybody who does not meet the criteria for categories 1 through 5 and is 21 years of age or older will go in category 6. And the same is for anybody who doesn't meet the criteria for 1 through 4, but are under the age of 21, they will be in category 7. So, say for instance, you apply for services, you're found to be eligible for APD and the waiver, and you don't meet the category criteria for 1 through 5, you will be automatically placed in either category 6 or 7 by age. If you believe that you should be placed in a different category, you need to speak up and you need to say, but wait a minute, no, I'm 70 years of age and I really do think that you need to put me in category 4. We'll do that. We just need documentation so that we can keep it in our records and say, okay, so this warrants a category 4. And the other thing I want to mention is we don't always get additional funds from the legislature to send out offer letters like we did this year, and we've been talking about it. I'm sure you've already heard about it. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. So it's important that to know that there was a period of about 4 or 5 years that we did not get additional funds. But now that we did, we're going to be offering waiver services for people who are in categories 1 through 5. But if you're in category 6 and you really believe that you should be in one of the others, you need to notify your regional office. You need to provide documentation to say, but wait a minute, I'm really, you know, in this other category. It's important that you keep the regional office updated on your current situation. I hear from a lot of people who say, I've been on the waiting list for 10 years or however long. I know it's too long. Any period of time on the waiting list is too long, but that we've never heard from, that never respond to the annual letter that goes out. It's important that you update the agency if you have an address change, a phone change, if your circumstances change. It's really important that you notify the agency. Plus, the director mentioned earlier, we do have a pot of money called IFs. And it's specific for services for people who are not on the waiver. So if you're on the waiting list and you may need some respite, maybe you have a child under the age of 21, they would be receiving other services from other agencies. As you know, the waiver and the agency is the payer of last resort. So say, for instance, the child is under the age of 21, they may be receiving services through Children's Medical Services or Medicaid State Plan or the parents' health insurance or whatever the case may be. It's important for you to know that if you need respite, for example, that you can always call the region and say, I need respite, and you know, you can ask. We have the IFs funds are very limited, and they can only be approved for the current fiscal year, which ends on June 30th every year. But they may have something. They may be able to help and alleviate or help to avert a crisis. Sometimes a little bit of help may be able to help avert a crisis. So this is how someone can enroll on the waiver. Right now, we mentioned that the crisis waiver enrollment process, that's the waiting list priority category what? One, thank you, yes. So if you meet the priority category 1 and you're in crisis, you can go on the waiver. Community-based care, CBC, that would be priority category 2, thank you. Exactly right. So anybody who's in foster care and also meets the eligibility criteria for APD services, and they're adopted, reunified, or they're in permanent placement, they can enroll on the waiver. So waiting list to waiver offers. That means that if the legislature appropriates additional funds for that particular year and they're approved and the governor signs it, we get that amount of money to offer additional slots over and beyond what we already get for crisis and community-based and foster care kids. Individuals in crisis and foster care kids continue to receive services, continue to receive an option to be able to enroll on the waiver. But if we receive additional funds like we did this year, then we can also now go and offer people in waiting list category 3, 4, and 5, who we assume, because of the priority category description that I told you earlier, are at high need, have a higher level of need, and those are the ones that are going to be offered. Dependents of active duty military service members. So back in 2014, the Florida legislature authorized individuals who meet the APD eligibility requirements in statute to receive home and community-based services in this state of Florida if the individual's parent or legal guardian is an active duty military service member and was transferred to Florida from another state, and at the time of their service member's transfer, the individual was receiving home and community-based services in another state. So if somebody meets that criteria right there, they can also go straight to the waiver. Individuals who currently reside in intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disability, and through a choice counseling process, choose waiver services, they too can enroll on the waiver. They don't have to remain on the waiting list. And what they do is they just have to say so during a choice counseling process. And Phelan-McDermott syndrome, these were added in 2016. The legislature authorized money at that point to offer waiver enrollment to individuals with a diagnosis of Phelan-McDermott syndrome. They must also meet APD's eligibility criteria of being 3 years of age and being a Florida resident, and of course diagnosed with showing proof of diagnosis of Phelan-McDermott syndrome. So these are the ways that someone can enroll on the waiver as we speak right now. And what I wanted to mention about the waiting list to waiver offers, so you do know that this year we received $95 million to transition individuals from the waiting list on categories 3, 4, and 5 onto the waiver. And we're currently preparing to send out offers. Those offers are going to go out on a monthly basis. There are some requirements that need to occur for these individuals who are on the waiting list, and so we're working with our regions, working with the individuals who are on the waiting list, and as soon as we're able to, on July 1, we will start sending out offer letters, and monthly thereafter until we complete sending out all offers. So now I want to tell you a little bit about the iBudget waiver services. So a lot of people hear about the waiver. In Florida, there are several waivers. The Agency for Persons with Disabilities, we have been delegated the day-to-day operations of the Florida Medicaid Developmental Disabilities Individual Budgeting iBudget Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. And this waiver provides home and community-based supports and services to eligible persons with developmental disabilities living at home or in a home-like setting. And the iBudget waiver program is funded by both federal and matching state dollars. And these services are offered to enable individuals who meet the eligibility criteria to have a safe place to live, to have a meaningful day activity, meaning they should be able to access the community, whether it's through companion services or through the services of adult day training or employment services. Also to receive medically necessary medical and dental services, receive medically necessary supplies and equipment, whether it's consumable medical supplies and things of that nature, and receive transportation required to access waiver services. That concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have at this time. There we go. And we need to, I'll bring the mic to you. Yes, who had the hand over here?
Again, I just wanted to follow up with that question about getting off of the list. Because my daughter is now 14, and she's been on there since she was 2 years old.
And is she in what priority category? 7. Okay, so individuals who are in priority category 7, the assumption is that they may be able to receive services. Children receive services through other mechanisms or through other funding sources. There is no prediction, there's no way to predict how long someone is going to be on the waiting list from the time they're determined to be eligible for APD services to the time they begin receiving services. The ways to get off the waiting list are through that list, whether they're crisis or, foster care and reach permanency, or if we receive additional funding from the legislature. At the age of 21, a lot of children age out of services between the ages of 21 and 22. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes when that occurs, then they can enroll for enrollment through crisis, because if they stop receiving services that are necessary for their health and safety through other funding mechanisms, then they may be able to apply for waiver enrollment through crisis.
Unless they get into one of those categories, a child that is doing okay, receiving services through the school, therapies, and all that, basically they will stay on the list until they are 22. But you said 20, and the more funding, it will involve that they might get it this year, and for a couple of years, and then they say, okay, the funds are gone, that's it.
So I don't know, yeah, we received additional funds years ago for like 3 or 4 years in a row. Then we stopped receiving those additional funds to be able to produce offer letters. This is the first year, again, that we started. So we really don't know on a year-to-year basis whether or not we're going to receive the additional funding. So that $95 million was something we received this year to enroll people on the waiver, and there's no way to predict when that's going to happen again. It could happen next year, but until the legislative session, is completed, we really don't know. I have one more question over here.
If you have a family that's been approved for the waiver, and they're not military, but they have to move because of care, family or whatever, out to another state, or they move into Florida from another state, and they were on their waiver, like in Tennessee, do they automatically qualify for Florida, or do they have to reapply?
That is a very good question. Waivers do not transfer from one state to another. So anybody who moves away out of the state to another state, if they were on the waiver in Florida before they moved away to another state and they return within 12 months, they can re-enroll on the waiver. But if it's more than 12 months, they would have to reapply and possibly go on the waiting list. Yes.
If I adopted through DCF in 2009 and they're still under 18, does that count under that one criteria?
If he was a client of the agency, if they, the way it reads in statute is the child has to be a client of the agency and have an open case with DCF, meaning that they're in foster care at the time of adoption, reunification, or permanent placement. It wouldn't apply, but please, by all means, go ahead and apply now. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So we have a child who currently has services through Children's Medical Services. We will lose that probably next year because of income guidelines. And at that point, we have no services whatsoever for him. He has no commercial insurance. CMS is all we have. He's significantly disabled. He's G-tube fed. We have nursing right now. But he's only 14, so he'll be 15 when he loses it. Is there a place on the waiver for the kids before they're 21 in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's situation where children sometimes meet crisis criteria, but you would have to apply. We would have to look at the specific situations, when he loses services, what types of services, and But again, you would need to apply through crisis. Like, you would need to call the regional office and say, he's losing services on X date. I need to apply through crisis. They need to look at the specific situation and the circumstances and make a determination. Anybody else?
My question is kind of coming back to hers. If our children were special needs while in foster care, how do we know if APD was applied for the child? Because I too adopted in 2012. My son was 4 at the time, but I have no clue if the application went in or not.
We can find out for you. Yeah, we can find out. You would need to call the regional office and we can find out. Okay, well, talk to me after the. Anybody else?
Okay, I have a question. When people are older and they pass away, or on the waiver, when you don't use your whole budget, there's money left, and so that goes back to the state, what happens to that funding? Why can't they put more people on with the people who are passing away and the funds that aren't being used? Why aren't more people being put on the wait list? Because, I mean, off the wait list because of that?
Well, that possibly goes through people who enroll on the waiver through crisis or through the CBC or, you know, other people. That happens. That happens all the time, and that's all already included in the mix. So we know that people do pass away, but we know that new people get enrolled, and it all somehow works. But that's really like a type of question for someone from our finance department that can give you a straight answer. But the high-level answer is that, you know, that's part of what happens on an ongoing basis, and we know that happens. Anybody else? Okay, yeah, I think she had the hand up.
Just to verify, so we should be getting like an annual letter from your office stating that our child is still on the wait list, and if we don't, then we have to just, yep, okay, just want to verify that is a normal practice down here in Florida. Okay.
Well, that is a requirement in law. So if you have not received a letter, that could mean one of several things. We don't have your most current address, or I don't know. Something may have happened, but you need to pick up the phone, call the regional office, and ask, why have I not received a letter? In fact, this year, we have, since last July, we've been working with the regions on documenting the letters that have gone out, and we provide the regions with a list of those that don't have a field in our iConnect system that indicates that a letter has gone out, for them to verify what's going on. But if you haven't received it, you can either, I'll be happy to check on our system, or you can call your regional office and find out why. But it is a requirement. If you're on the waiting list, the 23,000 people who are on the waiting list should be receiving a letter on an annual basis. I had somebody had the hand up here.
Hi, this is my first time hearing about this program, and why is there such a discrepancy in the need and then the ability to provide the services?
It all boils down to funding. So we have the waiver program in Florida is very large. It's much larger than other programs in other states. We serve close to 55,000 people, and in other states, they serve maybe 1/3 of that number. So we have sufficient funds. It's all appropriated by the legislature, so it's all based on the amount of money we receive from the legislature. It's part state and part federal. But depending on the amount of money that is appropriated is the amount of people we can serve, basically. So that's really important for you to communicate your needs with your legislators and your representatives. Yes.
Hi. What is the difference between med waiver and APD?
Thank you. That's a great question. The question is, what's the difference between med waiver and APD? APD is the state agency for persons with disabilities. So APD is delegated by the Agency for Healthcare Administration the day-to-day functions of operating the iBudget waiver. Now, the iBudget waiver is a funding program that provides, it's through that funding that we provide services to our clients, to clients that are determined to be eligible for services through our agency. Did that answer your question? So the waiver is a funding program that our Agency for Healthcare Administration is the agency that oversees all of Medicaid. They delegate APD, and I say APD because I work for APD, with the day-to-day operations of the iBudget waiver program. So we work hand in hand with the Agency for Healthcare Administration to provide services and to be able to meet the requirements of the waiver program for the people that we serve. Thank you. That's a good question, and we assume everybody knows, but that's a great question. Thank you. Med waiver, iBudget waiver, the waiver, yes, except that there are several different waivers that the Agency for Healthcare Administration oversees, and they delegate the different state agencies the day-to-day operations of those different waivers. And what waiver means is that you're waiving all the requirements of somebody being in an institution, okay? And instead of the person living in an institution, the person is able to reside in a community-like setting successfully. You know, we're able to meet the person's needs in the community. Without those funds from that waiver, the person would reside in an institution. So they have to meet the level of care criteria provided in an institution in order to be eligible to receive services from the waiver. The waiver means we're waiving certain requirements. I hope that makes sense. Yes.
I just have one more question. During the pandemic, my daughter, I was contacted from out of nowhere that she was eligible for services. So I had services for like 6 months, 4 hours in the evening, and then it stopped. They say you're no longer eligible. So it was from like Waiver. Yeah. And I could pick the person to come in and take care of my child for like 4 hours in the evening. And then it stopped. And I'm like so confused. I'm like, okay, I'm still on this category 7, but then I got this services for 6 months during the pandemic. What's going on?
Okay, so if you're in category 7, that means she's still on the waiting list. She's not on the waiver. Those weren't waiver funds. Those would have been, I'm assuming, IFS funds. But I'll be happy to find out if after the presentation is over, you give me your name, I'll go, I look, and I'll be happy to find out what that was about and explain it to you. You may be able to get more of that, but like I mentioned earlier, IFS funds are only approved for the current fiscal year. And those are limited amount of funds, and they're available to people who are on the waiting list to receive certain supports and services on a short-term basis. And usually they're specific for a special amount of time or a special amount of units or something that would alleviate some specific need. So there may have been some communication back and forth trying to determine what type of need there was, and somebody made a decision that you needed it, that your daughter needed it for a certain amount of time, but I'll be happy to look into that. Yes.
So I heard somebody else mention CMS. You can still have APD, the med waiver, beyond whatever the terminology is, and still have like CMS and have services. This is intended for additional services that like CMS wouldn't cover that you can't get. Is that what I'm understanding?
So the waiver is the payer of last resort. APD would be the payer of last resort. Any type of service that's available through another funding source would need to be accessed through that other funding source first. So, for example, with Children's Medical Services, they provide therapies or behavior or nursing or whatever the services are that they provide, we would not be able to provide because, like I said, we're the payer of last resort and we can't duplicate what another agency provides. So there may be a circumstance where a child, it's like we say a lot that usually children are served by other agencies. We do have children on the waiver. There are certain circumstances where some children will need waiver services, maybe placement, or maybe, you know, there may be some type of service. But if they're on the waiver and they need nursing, the nursing would be provided by Medicaid State Plan anyway. The behavior supports would be provided by Medicaid State Plan. Therapies would be provided. So it's very specific, very unique to the specific child, and based on their needs, it's whether or not, you know, they would be served by the waiver before the age of 21. Yes, 21, yes. Yes, yeah. Is he close to the age of 21? Oh. Yeah, well, it might be very specific. Yeah. You had your hand up? Huh? Okay. Who was first?
What are the specific income and asset limitations for getting on med waiver?
That's a question for DCF. We don't determine income and asset limits. We don't do Medicaid eligibility. So that's definitely a question that DCF would need to be able to answer for you. And I'll be happy to show you or point you in the right direction of where to find the answer for that. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, based on her question, I'm gonna change mine. I have a 5-year-old with autism, nonverbal, so I'm assuming he might qualify. He gets on the waiting list. You guys are not gonna check any income or anything, because if he's always on category 7, He might move up, maybe because he doesn't have any more services because he's 22, he's out of school, maybe he's not going to college. In that case, it doesn't matter the parent's income because he's supposed to be an adult, no?
Again, so the Agency for Persons with Disabilities will be looking at the eligibility criteria for APD and the waiver. Once they're determined eligible, if there is an open waiver spot for the person who's on the waiting list, having Medicaid would be a requirement for being able to receive waiver services, but you would have to work with the Department of Children and Families to apply for and get eligibility for Medicaid for the waiver. So that is not something, like we in APD, we would not be looking at the income because that's not part of our responsibility. That's not our role. The DCF would be the right people. And so for example, and it's very good that you're asking that question because as we prepare to send out, say, 2,000 offer letters, we will have to work with the Department of Children and Families hand in hand to make sure that they help, that they process these applications for Medicaid, because that is a requirement. And in the cases of adults, typically, you know, when they're looking at eligibility for adults, they have something that's called family of one, but I am not the right person to answer any of those questions because, again, it's not our role. It's DCF's role, but we have to work hand in hand with them in order to be able to, like, we have to find out from them, yeah, the person already has Medicaid and it's, the begin date is on July 1, so from July 1, then we can enroll the person on the waiver.
Right now we use private insurance. We don't, because of income, we don't have any, no help whatsoever. But I don't know into what age kids are allowed to be on parents' insurance, health insurance. So
Yeah.
that I don't know, but I'm assuming probably the health insurance is gonna say, no, this is an adult, it should not be under your insurance.
Yeah, well, again, that's really, it's on or about that age. But again, for children, you can always still, you know, stay and have an open communication with the regional office because there are some limited funds that we may be able to offer. Oh, and our time is over. I think I ran out of handouts, so I'll be happy to send you one but if you give me your name. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'm going to stand here for a little bit. Yes.